Hey everybody, Hoosier Jedi here with another review for you. This time talking episode 15 of season 2 of Star Wars Rebels called The Honorable Ones. And this is an episode that basically kind of a little bit of a focus in on Agent Callus and a little bit more on Zeb as well. This is kind of really our first our second Zeb episode where we really just kind of get into him very heavily. And this is the first one where we get into Agent Callus. And this episode is actually pretty important for Callus as a character. Before he's been presented as, very much your standard evil Imperial, not a whole lot of depth to him. Very, very Grand Moff Tarkin, somebody who's just died in the wool Imperial, and even with that stuff aside, really does not seem like a good person. Here, though, we're given a lot more depth to this guy. So let's just kind of get right into things. Now, the whole, two enemies stuck together, forced to work together to survive. I mean, it's very, very cliche. In fact, there's a really famous science fiction movie from the 80s, Enemy Mine, that's very, very heavy on this one, but is extremely well regarded film. I've only ever seen part of that movie, but the part I did see was pretty good stuff. But anyway, this episode does present us with some stuff that does seem to contradict things that we've learned in season one regarding, the Lasat and Callus and all that. But I think if you stop and think about it, these contradictions actually make sense. Now, the two big things are it was implied by Callus in season one when he first meets Zeb that it was like, yeah, I was totally responsible for massacring huge amounts of Lasat, and oh yeah, I stole this bow rifle from some Lasat jerk off, and now oh yeah, I used these horribly illegal weapons that even the Empire banned as inhumane on them. And here in this episode, it's like, nah, man, I was just another guy who was there. I didn't have anything against the Lasat. I was just following orders, and no, I didn't steal this off some dead royal guardsman. I beat this guy in battle fair and square, and he gave it to me in accordance with tradition. And I've been carrying it with me since then out of respect for that guy. Again, this is in keeping with Zeb's culture. And this, of course, raises the question, well, okay, if Callus didn't do all that stuff, why did he say those things to Zeb? And the most likely explanation is he wanted to piss Zeb off so Zeb would, do something reckless and stupid and make it easier for Callus to kill him. Because, Zeb was trying to kill Callus. So, while I suppose you might technically have to call it a retcon, it's one that's pretty simple and frankly makes a lot of sense. It's also, despite this being really focused in more on Callus and Zeb, Zeb does have his nice moments. He again says like, "Look, I'm gonna like when he says to Callus, like I could totally kill you right now if I wanted to. You're hurt and all, but I'm not. I'm gonna wait until you're healed, and we're gonna fight fair and square and settle this thing between us once and for all properly." Again, showing Zeb to be an honorable person. Zeb, for example, does not tell his friends that Callus is there when grabbing a guy like Callus would be a pretty big boon for the rebels, especially considering all the information he must know that would be extremely useful to them. And again, Zeb does fight to save Callus's life when he actually doesn't have to. And I also really liked when Callus sort of talked about how he believed in what the Empire was doing, and Zeb is like, "Oh yeah, well where are all the Geonosians at?" And Callus is like, "I don't know, that's above my pay grade." And Zeb's all like, "Well, what do you think they just went on vacation or something? Maybe you should think about that." And what's interesting is the Darth Vader comic book series, which is considered currently to be canon, did mention recently that, and remember, this is only about 5 years or so before the events of the original Star Wars movie, that the Empire basically expunged the Geonosians because they played a big part in the construction of the Death Star, and well, you don't want those plans falling into the hands of nasty rebels, now do you? So let's stop and look there. The Empire has basically committed genocide against an entire species, something the Empire in the old EU was known to do more than once, And Callus is just like, hey man, whatevs. I don't know anything about that. It's not my place to know things about that. But what Zeb says to him gets through to him. For example, when we go back and see Callus at the end of the episode, his commanding officer can barely look up from his paperwork to acknowledge the fact that Callus is alive. When Callus goes to his room, he sits down in this Spartan, lightless, utilitarian place that has no spark of personality or humanity in it. And you have to think he has to be looking around at all this and is like, this, this is what my life has amounted to. And that's that visual there really is something that strikes home with me. It kind of reminds me of my old college dorm room, although thankfully not quite as bad most of the time. And when you move into a dorm like that or into a new apartment in general, it takes a while for you to kind of put your personal touches on things, to kind of make things feel like it's a place that belongs to you. I remember as a kid sort of being puzzled by posters. And I know that sounds like a really strange thing. I never had any posters in my room as a kid. I just didn't see the point of them. Then when I got to college and I was like had these crappy concrete walls in my head to look at all the time, I'm like, ugh, maybe I should go out and buy a couple of posters to sort of brighten the place up a bit. And I did that, and I was surprised at how much that helped the place really seem like it belonged to me. And you've been able to see a little bit of my apartment here in the background. As you can see, I'm kind of a little bit bad about having clutter build up on my kitchen counter. But you can see that I have these pictures on the wall. This nice big picture back here. Got that stuff on my fridge. Got that thing over there over my sink. And those are all little things that I put up there. Like putting these things up was when I first moved to this place was really important to me because it made it seem like this was my home, that this was my place, that this belonged to me. And Callus doesn't even have that. Now, granted, there's probably some sort of imperial regulations. It is a military facility wherever it is that he is, and they tend to be, from what I understand, a little rather strict on keeping clutter to a minimum. But still, there's nothing in there that really says anything about him having anything beyond that role as an agent. I mean, the guy doesn't even have a coffee mug. And that's really a great way of thinking about what the Empire does to people. It makes you into nothing but a tool. And all those little touches, those little things that make you a person. I mean, let me give you a little example since I mentioned coffee mugs. Here, keep this off to the side. It's just something I keep my pens with if I'm doing some work here on the computer and need to write something down or whatever. And if you, I'll hold up to the camera real nice there. Now, if you can take a look at that, that says on it Sweden in Swedish. Now, I've never actually been to Sweden. I picked that up at like a Goodwill store near my house for like $1, just because it's like, oh, it's just kind of this cool little coffee mug that somebody picked up on a trip to Europe. That's cool. I've never been to Europe. I'd love to go to Europe. So, I mean, it's just a little thing. It's just something I keep my pens in. But it's a little bit of personality, a little bit of humanity that breathes some life into my apartment. And again, Callus doesn't have any of that in what passes for his home, I suppose. And going back to what I said about what the Empire does to people. Now, it's a little hard to get a read on exactly how old Callus is just by looking at him, but I kind of pick him up as somebody who's probably in his 30s somewhere. And now this is set 19, 20 years after the end of Revenge of the Sith. So if that's the case, Callus was probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 12, maybe 13 years old. Junior high school age when the Empire, or even younger, maybe elementary school age, when the Empire was formed. So he would have grown to manhood being fed that party line, that the Empire was this glorious thing that was going to set the galaxy to right after after the horrors of the Clone Wars. This whole, this is how liberty dies, something something dark side with thunderous applause. And they did mention, if I remember correctly, Compnor, which was a big part, if I remember correctly, in the old EU, and since, if I remember, it has been incorporated into the modern canon, was really a big part of the propaganda arm of the Empire. So, Callus being a young guy, young kid, part of a big part of his childhood. The Clone Wars went on for like 5 years, so probably from the time that he was, you know, elementary school, kindergarten age until about the time when he was around junior high school, that would have been going on. And those are really important years. And if those are spent during a horrible war, well, of course, the idea of anything like that happening again is going to be really repellent to you. And if somebody comes along and says, like, hey, we can make sure that never happens again, well, why wouldn't you support them? So here's Callus taking a look. It's like, man, I know that war crimes and horrible genocides and all sorts of terrible things were happening during the Clone Wars, and now here it is, the people that I joined up with. It looks like they really might be guilty of the same thing. And again, going back to the original EU, this was something that was really common. There were lots and lots of people who were part of the Empire who were just sold a bill of goods. They thought that the Empire was good. They didn't know anything about slavery and mass murder, genocide, all this other horrible stuff. That was always really shuffled off to the side and kept away from the public as much as humanly possible. And so they joined the Empire wanting to serve, wanting to go out and genuinely do good for the galaxy. Only once they got in, realized it's like, oh man, I've joined the bad guys. But the Empire was, of course, famous for not accepting resignations. Once you were in, you were in, and no, there was no saying, you know what, maybe this Galactic Empire thing isn't for me. I'm just gonna go back to civilian life once my enlistment period is over. That's not how it worked. So you had a lot of these people who were just decent people who were trapped and knew if they tried to speak out or tried to leave, that at best they'd get thrown into prison. Worse, they and everyone they knew about would be thrown into prison along with them, or they might just be executed. And this is ultimately what led exactly to lots and lots of Imperials defecting to the rebellion. And well, I think that covers everything that I had to say about this episode. It's interesting that they decided to take a step back and really flesh out Callus as a character. And I'm glad they did, because it is interesting to sort of see the Empire from the perspective of Imperials. This is one of the things that they've gone back to time and time again in Star Wars. And again, it's always interesting to see things from the other side of things. Like, for example, stories told from the point of view of the Sith. Those are always really interesting stories. Things like Lost Tribe of the Sith, the Darth Bane novels, all really good stuff. If you play Star Wars: The Old Republic, it's very fun to play Imperial characters, kind of get to see that inner workings of the Empire, see the people who have unfortunately been sold this bill of goods about what the Empire is, or people who are genuinely good people who see the Empire as an agent of doing good in the galaxy. And what's even more interesting is in that game, if you are playing an Imperial character, you can actually go out there and genuinely do good in the galaxy. You can legitimately help people if you choose to. You can take out guys who are actually even worse than the Empire. And again, if you really want to have some fun in the Old Republic, play an Imperial character who is aligned to the light side. I absolutely had a blast playing a Sith warrior who was most of the time a light sided character. He tried to do good most of the time. most of the time. He's like, okay, well, anyway, you don't want to hear me ramble on about my video game character. That's boring as hell. I know. But what was interesting is that the reaction from so many people was always like, man, I never would have expected this from a Sith. There's this great scene where you actually like help save a Jedi's life, and he's just like, I don't get you, man. I mean, thanks for saving my life and all, but I have no damn idea what to make of you. And it's hilarious that you actually get a message from this Jedi later who went back to the Jedi Council and told them what happened, and the Jedi Council were just like, wait, a Sith did all this? I mean, they're all just sort of like going WTF at each other, and it's just hilarious. Anyway, I'm going to call it here, guys. As always, please comment, rate, and subscribe. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Hoosier Jedi, and please also join me on Tumblr at Jedi Reviewer. Till next time, take care and have a good one.